Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you. I invite you to join me in the book of 1 John, chapter 2. We're going to use 1 John, chapter 2, a few verses from that place as our launching pad for what we're going to do this morning. 1 John, chapter 2. We're going to read 15 through 17 together. 1 John 2, verse 15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride in possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away, along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. When God wrote this book that we now have in our laps, what he did was he wove intentionally themes throughout all of these books of the Bible. And the more that we read the Bible, the longer that we read the Bible, the more these themes through these teachings and Bible stories are going to stand out to us. I believe that when John is writing these things in 1 John 2, he's tapping into one of these major themes of the Bible, and that is this, that human beings often see something that they deem to be beautiful, that they deem to be good, desirable, and contrary to God's will and God's desires, humans take those things that they want and they suffer the consequences, and perhaps those around them suffer as well. And since John is coming at the very end of the Bible storyline, here in 1 John 2, there are a lot of Bible stories that I think demonstrate the dangers of this theme that he is describing to the people that he is writing to. And so what I'd like to do this morning is backtrack into the Old Testament now from 1 John. And I'd like to look at 4 particular stories with you that show this theme of seeing and taking and then experiencing death or exile, suffering because of that. But I don't just want to look at those 4 stories. I also want to connect them to the cross. I want to connect them to Jesus Christ, because he comes down here as a man and he breaks this cycle that all of us fall into in our lives. And so we'll look at some sin, some darkness, but we're going to end with hope. So I want you to go to Genesis chapter 3 now, to the passage that was read for us just a moment ago by Keith. I want to reread one verse of Genesis 3, the last verse that he read. Just like Maria von Trapp would say, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And backtracking from that verse, you see in the text, she is doing this in response to what the serpent is feeding into her heart and her mind about how this is a good thing. You're not going to surely die if you eat this, contrary to what God told you about this wonderful, beautiful tree that he put in the midst of the garden, right next to the tree of life, which you can eat from. This is a good thing for you to do. You would become like God, knowing good and evil. I think it's interesting because I think we're clearly told earlier in Genesis, Eve was already like God, was she not? In the sense that she was made in the image of God, and just like God is the ruler over the entire universe of his creation, both the seen and the unseen realms, he created Adam and Eve to have dominion over the world that he had made here, planet Earth. And so there are a lot of ways in which she's already like God, but Eve understood that there were clearly many ways that God was over her, that he knew more than she did about good and evil. And so she decided to make a power grab. Do you remember that many times in the Genesis account of creation in chapter 1, what does it keep saying that God saw when he made the things on day 1 and 2 and 3, etc.? God saw that what he had made was good. God gets to define what goodness is, what it truly looks like. He's able to discern what is good for his creatures that he makes. But notice here in chapter 3 that the same language is used about Eve. Eve saw that the fruit was good, except she is not fully able to discern the way that God is. She trusts her own desires. She redefines goodness, but appearances can be deceiving, as they were in this particular case. And so what happened as a result of her action? There's shame. Up to this point in the Genesis narrative, it's okay to be naked. It's okay to be completely vulnerable to everyone around you. But at this moment when sin comes, now Adam and Eve feel their vulnerability. They feel that from each other. They want to hide and conceal their bodies now. Now nakedness is shameful in a way that it wasn't before. And so they've got to hide from themselves, from each other, and from God. And then there's exile. And this exile, I think, foreshadows all of the other exiles that follow after this account. And there is death. As God said that there would be, they cut themselves off from their very source of life, remove themselves from God, and experience death. So this is the very beginning of the cycle that sets the tone for the stories that follow. Let's look at another one. This one is from Exodus 32. Maybe it's not as well known when we think about stories that illustrate seeing and taking and then dying from that. But this is a good one because it also uses some of the same Hebrew words that Genesis 3 uses. You remember in Exodus 32, 4 and 5, Aaron received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And so just like in the garden, the people rejected God's perfect plan to give them goodness in the right way that he deemed best, because they see something that seems better in the moment in time in which they are in, and so they rewrite God's narrative of what is truly good and try to take something for themselves. So the people, remember at Mount Sinai, they get tired of waiting for Moses. He's up there receiving the law. God's talking to him. The people are down there below, and they're getting bored, or they're getting anxious, or they're getting something. And so they come to Aaron, Moses' brother, and they say, "We don't know what happened to this guy. So you fix the problem for us. You make us a god that we can worship." And so Aaron, instead of putting up a fight, instead of planting his foot down and saying, "Absolutely not, we only serve God," he's right up there giving us his covenant. For crying out loud, we've got to sit tight and wait for Moses. He says, "Well, give me all your gold jewelry that you collected from the Egyptians that God gave to you. Give that to me." And not only does he make an image, he also makes an altar so that the complete worship party can begin. This is just astounding to me, because this is the man who God is about to commission as his high priest. But before he's God's high priest, he is the high priest of a metallic baby cow. We serve a gracious God. That he didn't pull the plug on Aaron in the way that he did with some others. This word received and this word saw are the same words used in Genesis 3. The woman saw that the tree was good and she received of the fruit. What happens as a result of Aaron's actions? Well, Moses comes down the mountain in a holy rage. He takes the tablets of stone that were written on by the finger of God. He smashes them down at the foot of the mountain. He destroys the golden calf that they had made. He grinds it into powder. He throws it in water. He makes the people drink their own God. And the people are stripped of their ornaments from that time onward, and there is death. 3,000 people. Many have made the observation that this is a contrast to the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. 3,000 are baptized and saved, but 3,000 die at the foot of Mount Sinai when the Levites gather to Moses and take up swords and go through the camp slaughtering their brethren who are having a party with this cow. And others experience a plague. God comes close to destroying the entire nation before Moses goes down, but he talks him out of it. But we can see the cycle repeating again here in the very place at the very time that God is trying to make this wonderful covenant with his people. They break themselves apart and they experience this cycle and its consequences. Let's talk about another story that goes through the same process. When you think about Joshua 7, the people of Israel look like they're heading into golden territory at a golden time of their history because they've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because the generation before had complained and murmured and God got tired and sick of it all. And so he said, fine, you don't want to go in there. And they didn't want to go in. They were afraid of the Canaanites. They thought that they couldn't take the land and that they would be slaughtered. So God says, fine, I will take your children in and you will all die out here. And so that time period finally is over. And in the first part of Joshua, they cross over the river Jordan. They encounter this first massive walled city of Jericho. They obey the instructions of the Lord. The walls fell flat. They conquer the city. And so heading into this time, everybody's riding high. Everything looks like it's going really well, but then they try to fight Ai with a small portion of their forces, and they lose. They lose the battle, and 36 Israelites die that day. And so Joshua is flat on his face, asking God, what has happened? I thought you were with us. I mean, if you look at the last part of Joshua 6, just 6:27, the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the lands. But there was a problem that God quickly told Joshua about. There's sin in the camp. And I can't be with you if you guys have taken some of the devoted things. Jericho was the first city that they came to. God told them all of the possessions in that city, you don't take for yourselves. Those are mine. And yet we're told that somebody has transgressed that. And so the tribes are gathered to Joshua. The die is cast. Eventually Judah is taken. Eventually the place where Achan was in the scheme of Judah was identified. Eventually Achan himself is chosen. Joshua demands to know what he did. And Achan fesses up. And he says this, when I saw among the spoil, a good cloak from Shinar and 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, then I coveted them and I took them. Again, same Hebrew words that are used back there in Genesis 3 to talk about what the woman did and what the woman saw and what she took. Why did he do that? Because it was right in his eyes. It was beautiful to him, But what happened as a result of that? Well, there is shame. Shame on Achan, shame on the whole nation. And the entire congregation participates in his punishment. They take him to a place that they name the Valley of Achor, which means the Valley of Trouble, so that all future generations of Israelites would remember this place and what happened there to this man and what happened to the nation. And there is death. 36 Israelite warriors, we mentioned them at the first battle of Ai because of Achan. And then Achan himself and his whole family are destroyed. His animals too, stoned and burned. The cycle repeats. Let's look at one more. And this one is no doubt very well known to us all. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, we find out that at the time that kings went out to war, David, for the very first time in his life, as he has been leading men and troops into battle, for the first time, he stays home. And he doesn't go to fight the Ammonites. He sends Joab to do that. And instead, what we find is he's just bumming around the palace looking for something to do. And 2 Samuel 11 says it happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was, and here it is again, beautiful, good, desirable in my eyes. So, what did he do? He repeated the cycle. So David sent messengers and took her. The devil used this lifestyle change in David to give him some fruit right in front of his eyes, and David took the bait and saw Bathsheba and then acted like any selfish king would act in the world. A Canaanite king, maybe a Moabite king, when presented with the same situation, would say, I want that, I've got the position of power, therefore I'm going to grab that for myself. He acts as any king would do who did not have God. David has many women already, but he wants this other one who does not belong to him. And as a result, again, there is shame, there is death. An innocent child is conceived, but dies soon afterwards at birth because of David's sin, or shortly after birth. Bathsheba's husband is killed in battle on David's orders, and as punishment for destroying this innocent Israelite family, David's own family begins to break apart with violence. So there's the cycle in 4 different stories. Can we see ourselves in this cycle? Can we see our culture in this cycle? Let's talk about these 4 stories one more time and think about application. Think about the discontentment, the unsatisfied heart that is going on inside of Eve that causes her to reach out and grab this fruit and eat it for herself and give to her husband so that this sin happens. She was unsatisfied with the created position that she was given by her God, with the amount of knowledge that she was given, with the place that she was given. She tries to change herself to become someone else, a person with higher knowledge of good and evil, a person more like God. And in our culture, doesn't Eve's way of thinking get some traction in the world that we live in right now? Isn't this encouraged? For many right now, gender is a choice that you make for yourself that is distinct from the biological sex that you were born with. You get to choose that, many would say. And so many are unsatisfied with the created position that God has given, the choice that God has made for us in who we are. And many people believe that because perhaps they were not given good examples of what men and women should look like and how we should function together. And so if any of us are struggling with that, this discontentment, either in that way or in other ways in our life, or we're trying to help somebody else who is struggling with discontentment, we need to go back to the Scriptures and identify and appreciate the value of the different roles that God has made and the beauty of the choices that He has made for us. Because the only alternative is to repeat this cycle. Let's think about Aaron for a minute. Do you remember what Moses said to him when Moses got a chance to talk to his brother and he came down the mountain? He looks at Aaron and he says this is a direct quote from Exodus. "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" In other words, you clearly did this to please the crowd, but this is such a heinous act that surely they tortured you in some way. Surely this was against your will, right? Right? Surely they did something. No, but Aaron just responds the way Adam did. He shifts the blame. He deflects the responsibilities. And it's clear that Aaron is driven so much more by human approval than he is the approval of God. Peer pressure is such a powerful force, isn't it? One that I'm sure that all of us have felt from time to time. I'll confess to you and just be honest that this is a force that Bible teachers struggle with. I struggle with. Because it's tempting to just not teach scriptures that are harsh or might come across as harsh to the person that I'm teaching, the crowd that I'm teaching. It's tempting to soften the blow or the impact of passages like that are kind of fiery and brimstony, try to make them easier to digest. It's tempting to apologize for passages that seem so different from the culture that we live in. Well, Jesus does teach that about marriage and divorce. I'm really sorry about that. I wish that passage wasn't in there. I wish that passage didn't say what it says. I'm sorry, but that's what Jesus said. Are we ever tempted to do something like that? I am. But if we really believe that these are divinely inspired and life-giving words from Almighty God, then we should not wish for a single word of this book to be different from what it actually is. You know, when Jesus taught on marriage and divorce, you know, the reaction of his disciples on one of those occasions was, wow, well, maybe it's better that we just not get married. And Jesus didn't backpedal an inch. He just looked at them and essentially said, well, let the one who can receive it, receive it. It is what it is, guys. Lydia and I are reading through the Gospel of John together right now. And just the other day, we got to chapter 6, where Jesus teaches some very hard things about you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And we're told in John 6 that most of his disciples just walked away and just at that very moment decided this guy is a kook and I'm not following him anymore. And Jesus, when we read about his reaction to that, he didn't run down the road and say, oh, I'm sorry, let me rephrase the sermon. He just stands there and he looks at the 12 and he says, so you guys going to leave too? And they say no. And they continue on. But for Jesus, the gospel message is what it is. Now, should we become all things to all men, as Paul says? Absolutely. Should we use tact and discretion and the right words at the right time? Absolutely, we should. We should adapt our presentation of the gospel to the needs of our culture, but we dare not change the gospel from what it is to what our culture would like to hear. Because if we do, we are falling prey to the destructive cycle that Aaron fell into with human approval. Let's talk about David for a second. You know, human sexuality is a wonderful, wonderful gift from God. It was created as a good thing. It predates the presence of sin in this world. And so in its proper context, it should be celebrated as a legitimate blessing. Our young people, by the way, really need to hear that message. If they only hear, here's what you can't do, then they're going to grow up with a skewed perspective on the sexual relationship. That's a good thing. But when we see and we take what does not belong to us, we do cause destruction for ourselves, for others. The world says whatever feels good to you, either to yourself or your partner, whatever you see on the internet or in person, then you grab that for yourself as long as nobody gets hurt. Which I would question and say, well, how do we define getting hurt? Because there are a lot of ways to get hurt that go beyond physical pain, however we define that. When sexual desire is separated from a committed marriage relationship, when sexual desire centers around satisfying my needs instead of sacrificially giving to my spouse and satisfying his or her needs, then sex just becomes a hollow exercise that merely imitates the animal world. You know, when monkeys mate, I guarantee you, they're not thinking about Ephesians 5. They're not thinking about Jesus and his connection to his bride, his church. But for humans, created in the image of God, redeemed by Jesus Christ, we are told, amongst all of God's creatures, that there is profound spiritual significance in the marriage bed and what goes on there. So we shouldn't act like animals, because contrary to the clever thoughts of Mr. Darwin, we did not descend from monkeys. Let's talk about Achan. Let's talk about his greed, because that definitely transfers to our lives, right? Jesus said in Matthew 6, you cannot serve God and money. But many in our lands do serve money in lots of different ways. You know, it's one thing to take out a responsible mortgage, but it's a whole nother ball of wax to take your credit card and run it through Amazon and run it through stores with money that you don't have so that you can have what is newest or what is flashiest or the most of whatever it is that catches your eye. Certainly not all debt is the result of selfish grabbiness, but a lot of it is. Just listen to the desperate folks who call into the Dave Ramsey show sometimes. Across the street from our house here in Rantoul, there is a massive storage complex. And I will just clarify before I say what I'm about to say, that I'm sure that there are legitimate reasons to rent out storage space. So if you have rented out some storage space, I'm not automatically condemning you, just so you know. But I am going to paint with a broad brush. And I am going to say that I think that because in America there is such a big industry for storage space, does that not indicate there are a lot of people in our culture who have way too much stuff? And that just causes enslavement rather than enjoyment, because you lay out a lot of money to buy all of the stuff, and then you lay out a bunch of money every month to put it in an off-site location where you can't even see it every day. You visit it on occasion. Oh, I've got all this stuff right here. As a culture, we are seeing and taking because it's beautiful to us regardless of the cost. And I just want to say, it's not a sin to be rich, but it is a sin to focus on accumulating riches, and it is a sin to be focused on what riches can buy. Remember what Jesus said in Luke 12? Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. Because remember what Achan said? I coveted them, so I took them. Be on your guard against covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Do we see that this cycle is so easy to fall into in lots of different ways? Whether we talk about sex, or we talk about money, or we talking about wanting to make people happy with us, or not being content with the position that God put us in our lives, and the people that He put us around, and the things that He gave us to do. We have this cycle in our hearts at different points in our lives, but Christians have the comfort of knowing that the Lord that we serve did not fall into that cycle, and instead He came down here and He broke it. He turned it on its head. He smashed it down into the dirt. And so if you follow Jesus of Nazareth, this cycle does not, should not at least, define your life and your mindset or mine. Because as several of our songs that Ty picked out described, and I appreciate that. When Ty asked me last night, so what are you preaching on? Do you have any songs that you'd like me to lead? I had nothing for you, but you did great stuff with this. You remember what Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane as He is contemplating the enormity of the pain and the anguish that He is about to go through? And He's talking to His Father. He says, can you take this cup away from me? Can you let it pass? But what He concludes all of His prayers with, that He prayed over and over again in the garden, was, I know that this is not all about me, that this is about what you want, that this is about your desires and not my own, not my will, but yours be done. Do you remember what 1 John 2 said? The world and its desires are passing away, but the one who does the will of God abides forever. And Jesus is abiding forever. And those that He saves, those who come to Him and are sick and tired of dying, we will live forever too. Alongside of this Savior of ours who has sacrificed His life for our sakes, instead of adding His life to the cycle of brokenness that we all experience. Instead of selfishly taking what was not His and causing suffering to Himself and others, He took on the suffering of other people for transgressions not His own, so that we could have life. And so the equation has changed for all who put their trust in Jesus of Nazareth. Theoretically, He could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set Him free, as we sing in the song. But practically speaking, that choice was unthinkable, because the whole reason why He came was to accomplish someone else's desires. And so that sacrifice of His body and His blood was the result of an obedient heart. Do we have this kind of heart within us? If you are a disciple already, I wanted to encourage you, as I'm encouraging myself, because all these sermons smack me in the head just as much as they smack you. Let's renew our hearts to be like this. And if you are not a disciple this morning, the invitation stands for you to come to this Jesus And as we're about to sing in the song that Ty's going to lead us in, Jesus invites us to surrender all to him. Not some, not most, but the whole kit and caboodle. To devote all of our desires to his desires, to glorify his name and not ours. It's the only way to break this cycle. Jesus invites you to do that, and we would love to help you with that this morning as together we stand and we sing this song.